they are. Let us know in the Q&A if folks on the Zoom can't see it.
Oops. Sorry. Here we go.
Okay, great. So I should begin.
I think we're all set.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining our call. I am Irene Lin. I am the Ohio Campaign Director for our Welcome Pack. Welcome Pack is all about having a big tent Democratic Party welcoming disaffected independents, Republicans, moderates to join our coalition and bring some sanity back to America. So we are proud to announce today our Why No JD campaign as we go into these last crucial days of the election. We know that Ohio has proven to kind of be the big surprise. I don't think a lot of people were thinking that we would be talking about Ohio as a battleground Senate race, but we are. And so we are doing something I think that is unique among, PACs and working here in Ohio, and that we are explicitly targeting ticket splitters. We know the polls have shown that 1 in 5 folks voting for Republican for governor are not voting for JD Vance. So we wanted to go through a little bit some of the data, some of the things that we are launching for these last couple of days, and also hear from some of our speakers as well, some of whom are ticket splitting as to why no JD, because there are many reasons why. So we want to do the first slide. So we show that poll after poll shows right now that 1 in 5 of the Republican voters are not voting for JD Vance, and that the majority are going over to Tim Ryan. And by the way, if anytime at any point you guys have questions from the press, just use the Q&A and I should be able to see it and get an answer for you. And then just hot off the press today, we didn't have time to update it because it just came out literally an hour ago, was the Baldwin-Wallace poll showing Tim at 50% to 46 for JD Vance, and the pollster saying that there will be likely to see ticket splitters this November. We know, this conventional wisdom is that, oh, everyone's so polarized and there's no persuasion needed. There's no ticket splitting left. And I think that's simply not true here in Ohio. We've done it before, and hopefully we'll do it again. Next slide. And so, yeah, this was another poll that was just last week from Ohio Northern University, where the pollster also says, confirming that we're likely going to see a bunch of Ryan voters this November. Okay, next slide. Some people will ask, for those of us who have worked in the Midwest, me in Wisconsin and Iowa, yes, we have been burned by polls a lot before. So, I do get asked like, oh, can you really trust these polls? But we do want to point out in 2018 that the Ohio polls did show accurately that DeWine was running ahead of Renee C., the GOP nominee at that time. And so we think that the polling right now that shows that the fact that there is ticket splitting going on is accurate. And we know that in the final result, Sherrod Brown was able to beat Renee C. So I think we are hopeful that right now that the data is accurate. Okay, next. And so here is one of our ads that we're going to be running. So right now we are targeting local newspapers, rural newspapers, small town newspapers. We have been running digital ads, but we're going to be upping those in the last week. Those are Facebook, Instagram, as well as pre-bought programmatic ads. So we're going to show you one of them, which I think is pretty good. Here's the newspaper ad that's going up. We're still trying to figure out. We're going to try and target the smaller towns, because I do think that is often overlooked by Democrats when we're doing, everyone wants to bombard the TV airwaves, but as we know, a lot of people are cutting the cord more and more. And on digital, that next. So here's one of the ones, 15 seconds that we are going to be running on digital to show why no JD.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
And then we also have an ad going up on radio because we have set up an 888 number to say why no JD so that folks can call in on that. Oh, sorry, this is another digital ad that we're putting up thanks to one of our speakers, Chris Gibbs.
Hi, Chris Gibbs, farmer and former Shelby County, Ohio Republican Party chair. J.D. Vance has changed his views so many times on important issues, it's no wonder that 1 in 5 Republicans have rejected Vance. Tim Ryan has stood up to China's job killer trade practices, and he's even secured millions for Ohio law enforcement. Tim supports people like you and me and has earned my vote in November. Join me. Hi, Chris Gibbs, farmer and former.
So we have Phil On, who wrote an op-ed in the Sandusky Register recently about why he wasn't voting for JD. So this is also another Facebook ad that we'll be boosting. So I guess we're going to play the radio ad.
Why are so many Republicans not voting for J.D. Vance? I'm Phil Heimlich, a lifelong Republican and former county commissioner who will split my ticket this year and support Tim Ryan for U.S. Senate. I'm saying no to J.D. Vance because he's a bootlicker and a phony. Tim Ryan has stood up to China and his own party to bring jobs back. Why are you saying no to J.D. Vance? Call 888-587-NOJD to tell us. That's 888-587-NOJD.
Paid for by welcomeback.org, which is responsible for the content of this advertising, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
Okay. And we are also planning on doing a texting campaign. We have modeled a universe. Sometimes people ask, like, which Republicans are you going to? I think we're going for both, you know, the Trump Republicans who have never really trusted JD Vance. They know he's not really one of them and are definitely not enthusiastic to vote for him. And we're also more of the Kasich Republicans who think that, you know, there's a lot of extremism going on in the Republican Party and across the country because, you know, Tim is a common sense, pragmatic guy who puts Ohio first. So I'm now going to turn it over to some of our folks. I don't know if anyone has any questions yet. Don't think I see any. So first person we'll be Chris. Chris, you've already sort of been introduced via your ads, but I'll let you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Irene. Just to give an additional background, I'm a farmer. I own and operate 560 acres of row crops here in Shelby County and Logan County, Ohio, and also raise cattle. I'm a former GOP chairperson, 20 years within the party leadership, and over a decade of GOP appointments to the Board of Elections as well. I left the GOP in 2019 because I just kind of felt it really no longer shared my core values. Those are 4: diplomacy, statesmanship, compassion, and personal responsibility, those 4. And I identified at that point as independent. Well, I started looking for a party and a candidate when we got closer to this midterm election, started looking for a party and a candidate who valued those 4 tenets and let everybody else have a voice, let everyone have a voice, as opposed to the ultra MAGA movement where there's only one authorized voice, as we're well aware. So let's be fair. The Democratic Party at times seems a little bit like herding cats, and that's fine, but there's no question that everybody's voice in the Democratic Party has value. And I like that. That's why I'm now a registered Democrat, because of what I saw in candidate Tim Ryan. So let me tell you a quick story. Tim's campaign called me in July, and they were doing roundtables for 8 to 10 folks in different disciplines, whether it was steel workers or nurses or teachers. They wanted to chat with farmers. And I said, you know what? I'll do that, but how about more than 8 or 10? How about 30? So I called 30 folks that I knew, farmers and folks that worked in agriculture around my county. All of them showed up. Called 30, 28 of them showed up. Keep in mind, these are 80% Republican folks. Tim got there, he did 3 things. And number one, he showed up. He showed up in a ruby red county like Shelby County. Showed up on time. He talked for 5 minutes, never said the word J.D. Vance, never said the word Democrat, never said the word Republicans. All he talked about was, we're all Americans. And he said, what can I take to the Senate for you? And then he did this. He listened to these folks for 75 minutes. I've had politicians through my farm before. Republican politicians, and they'll come and they'll tell me how good they are and how bad America is. Well, I'm not interested in that. Tim listened for 75 minutes and these people responded. I knew right then and there that I was witnessing what I thought was the future of the Democratic Party, and that if I was moved by that, so would be many other legacy GOP voters and right-leaning independents. So because there are many, and I know this in my gut, I've talked to them within the legacy GOP who know instinctively that extremist candidates like J.D. Vance, who owes his whole existence to Peter Thiel, Trump, and McConnell, are never going to reunite us as Americans where we can get back to arguing over the nuances of policy rather than this inflammatory cultural issues that only serves to divide us. And I believe that's why, and Irene talked about this, I believe that's why we're seeing this split ticket phenomenon of nearly a quarter of Mike DeWine voters going to split their ticket and vote for Tim Ryan. So one other issue, and I think I've got time to do this real quick, but I want to talk about an agricultural issue that's come to my attention recently that really drives home the difference in candidates from a farmer like me, my perspective. J.D. Vance, his candidate disclosure indicates that he's invested in a money pooling platform that pools money together from wealthy accredited investors to buy, not operate, but just to buy U.S. farmland. That's just amazing to me, mind-boggling. Now, although these investment platforms are legitimate, these groups only, in my view, serve to keep young, beginning, undercapitalized farmers out of the market from owning and operating their own farms. I was a young, undercapitalized farmer at one time, 100 years ago when I started, and I started from scratch. So listen, agriculture is a national security interest, and it's what protects our supply of food and fiber and our massive network. That's our massive network of small and medium-sized farms, and that the owners of U.S. farmland also farm it themselves. This is important. So listen to Tim Ryan on my farm this summer. I'm confident that he appreciates keeping farms together in the family, owned by real farmers, and available for young farmers to purchase. Thank you very much for the time.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. And now Phil will take it away.
Thanks, Irene. I'm Phil Heimlich. I am not a farmer. No one would mistake me for that, but I am a lifelong Republican. I was an assistant county prosecutor for many years in Cincinnati. I've always been a strong law enforcement guy. I was a Republican on city council here in Cincinnati, and I was county commissioner. And, you know, when it comes to voting, here's who I vote for. I'm a strong Republican. I remain that. I vote for the candidate who stands for Republican values. And unfortunately, sometimes we have people who have an R next to their name, but they don't stand for Republican values. And the way I look at this race, and I've looked at the records of both candidates, when it comes to Republican values, frankly, Tim Ryan stands up for them a lot more than Vance does. I mean, you take law enforcement. Again, I'm a former prosecutor. Governor DeWine, I'll give credit, always stood up for the police. That's why I'm voting. Again, that's why I'm splitting my ticket. I'm voting for DeWine for governor, and I'm voting for Ryan for Senate. And I think I encourage other Republicans to do that as well. And like I said, law enforcement, you look at what happened on that January 6th attack where those cops were brutalized by those guys in the red hats who were breaking the windows and beating up the cops. Well, okay. I mean, look at this. Tim Ryan, he insisted those guys be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which I agree with. What about Vance? Get this. Vance, he doesn't think they're criminals. He's on their side. He says they're political prisoners. The guys who beat up the cops and broke all those windows and crapped on the floor, those are political prisoners. And I even found that Vance is raising money for their defense. What does he do? Does he raise money for the mafia too? I mean, so when it comes to law enforcement, again, DeWine's strong law enforcement, so is Ryan. Another issue that's important to me as a Republican is foreign policy. Go back to Ronald Reagan. We've always stood up to tyranny. We all remember Ronald Reagan's famous statement, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Well, when it comes to, let's look at the Ukraine situation. I mean, Ryan, he calls Putin a tyrant and a thug. He's voted for all the money we've sent to help Ukraine and for the sanctions. Vance, you know what he says? He says he couldn't care less. He doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. Can you imagine Ronald Reagan standing up the Berlin Wall and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, I don't care what happens to this wall. I mean, come on. So again, the guy who, in my view, stands for those values, Republican values, is Ryan. And finally, and this is probably most important to me, is character. To me, as a Republican, I value character even over issues. And you know, one thing that Governor DeWine and Tim Ryan have in common is they have not bought into this big lie that the 2020 election was stolen, which all the facts show it was not. I mean, they have decided to act with integrity and to say, look, whether you like Donald Trump, you don't like Donald Trump, it was a free election, and let's move on. Vance, for back in 2016, you know what he said? He said that Donald Trump was America's Hitler. America's Hitler. Okay. Well, now he's up on stage, and forgive my language, but this is what Donald Trump said. He said, this guy, pointed Vance, is, quote, kissing my ass. I mean, for gosh sakes. I mean, whether you, whatever issue you care about, I don't support cowardly flip-floppers. All right. I mean, again, DeWine and Ryan have been pretty consistent on these issues. And Ryan has stood up to his own party at different times. He ran against Pelosi for leadership. I mean, to me, that shows courage and that shows principle. And I have not found any time in the 20 years that Ryan served in Congress where he's flip-flopped, where you can say he didn't consistently stand for Ohio's interests. So when you sum it up, for me, again, I'm a ticket splitter. As a Republican, I'm going to vote for DeWine. For governor, I'm going to vote for Tim Ryan. Why? Because they stand for Republican values. And for me, as a lifelong Republican, that is what's most important.
Okay, thank you, Phil, for your passion. And our last speaker will be Megan.
Hi, Irene. How you doing? I'm Megan Baxter, and I guess I'm going to be a ticket splitter too. I am a lifelong registered Republican, although I don't have that badge very proudly these days. From what I know, my understanding has always been for the good of the country, and what's going on right now is not for the good of the country. I think Tim stands for the character that I like to see in a politician and in a person. Like Phil said, I think JD has been on seesaw with Donald Trump for way too long, and it's a crook as far as I'm concerned. He's not consistent. He seems insincere. And as a mom, as a businesswoman, as someone who wants to protect my reproductive rights in the future, I'm passionate for this community. Tim Ryan has my full support. I think I saw an ad that JD had that families deserve better. And you know what? We do deserve better because we deserve a candidate like Tim Ryan. And that's who I'm going to have my support for. And I encourage other Republicans to do the same. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Well, we didn't want to take too much of your guys' precious time. As we all know, election time is getting closer, but if anyone have any questions for any of our panelists or for us at Welcome Pack, feel free to throw it in the Q&A. And if not, this recording will be made available, and we'll send you guys some follow-up as well. Okay. So
Thanks,
I don't think
Irene.
I see. No problem. I don't think I see any questions. So then we can feel free to end, and thank you all for Megan. Are you voting for Whaley as well because of reproductive rights?
I probably would.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm ticket splitter, but it's a big ticket. So yeah,
So
I
you're
have two
still
daughters.
trying to decide. Got it. Another question. We know a lot of Republicans are frustrated with Biden and the economy right now. How representative of the GOP do you think you are given that? And so we do know inflation and gas prices are hitting a lot of folks.
Well,
Whether that's
if you want me to respond to that, back in when we had that terrible recession, 2007, 2008, everybody blamed George W. Bush for it. And the truth is, he was there when it when it happened, but I didn't think it was fair to put the blame on him for that. There were factors that had been building up in the housing market and others for years, and it hit when he was president. And with all due respect, we have been having major deficits piling up for years and years. And frankly, the biggest deficits we had were in the presidency before Biden. And in my opinion, as a fiscal conservative, I think that is what has led to the inflation. I don't think it's the policies of this particular administration that caused that. And so much like I felt Bush was maligned for the recession in 2008, I think it's a bit unfair to lay the blame for inflation that has been building up for years on the Biden administration.
Okay, anyone else on that?
Yeah, I'll just remind
Yeah.
remind listeners that this is a three-legged stool. Inflation is a three-legged stool, and it's the recovery that we came out of, the recovery dollars that were necessary to make sure that we recover from the pandemic. Let's keep in mind, we lost 1 million of our citizens during this pandemic. And this president, this administration had to come in on the end tail of that and try to help clean that up. So they offered, the Congress at the time and the president offered dollars to make sure that our citizens were taken care of. They got back on their feet to the best as possible. That's one leg. The second leg is the supply chain difficulty that we had all across the world. We're a global economy, like it or not. We can argue about that later. I hope we can argue about that kind of policy later. But we're a global economy, and we had hundreds of ships sitting out in Long Beach with supply that were trying to get into the United States. So that caused a complete backlog. It caused higher price. And there was price gouging as well. That's the second thing. And the third thing is Ukraine. Ukraine is part of this. It's a big part of where we are in inflation. That upset the apple cart with agricultural products, with oil, and the whole 9 yards. So it's a total package. Now I'll leave two other points here. If you're going to blame the administration, this administration, for inflation in the United States, who are you going to blame for double-digit inflation in the UK? And all the rest around the world? It's not this administration, all right? So, and let's see, one final thing. This inflation, it proved to not be transitory. We get that. That was a terrible thought. But it's going to ebb and flow. It's going to be dynamic because we've got a strong economy, a very strong economy, and that's also creating some good and bad. But I'll tell you what's going to be permanent. It's going to be transitory. It's going to work itself out eventually. But what's going to be permanent is what's happened with women's rights. And here's how these two things go together. While inflation is dynamic, it'll ebb and flow. Women's rights are not going to ebb and flow. The freedom of speech, the freedom of privacy, the freedom to choose your own health care, that stuff is stuck in stone now. And J.D. Vance wants to make, in this case, Ohio politicians responsible for women's health choices. That's unacceptable. It's permanent, and it's a deal breaker.
Yeah, I would just say to Haley's question, how representative of the GOP do you think you are? I mean, hopefully enough. Obviously, not the majority of Republicans are going to be crossing over, but we do hope there's enough, dissatisfied, exhausted majority, as Tim says, and represent enough to help him out. Okay, and then with that, we can you will get the slides, and we'll be following up with folks, and folks can also email me anytime as well. So, but thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Irene.